In forensic investigation, there is a principle that experienced detectives learn early. The absence of something is not nothing. It is evidence. When a body is found and the weapon is missing, the missing weapon tells you something. When a crime scene has been cleaned, the cleaning tells you something. When a room that should contain objects contains nothing at all, the emptiness is the clue. There is a room inside the Great Pyramid of Giza that had been empty for as long as anyone has been allowed to enter it. It is called the King's Chamber, and everything that should be there is not. No body, no inscription, no treasure, no name, no identification of any kind. Just a room of red granite and a lidless stone box. Empty. In 4,500 years of study, no archaeologist, no historian, no physicist, no institution has produced a satisfactory explanation for why. The mainstream answer, that grave robbers took everything before the first modern explorers arrived, has problems so significant that a growing number of serious researchers no longer accept it. And the alternative explanations that remain, once you remove the one that doesn't hold up, lead somewhere that the official version of history is not prepared to go. The King's Chamber was never a tomb. It never contained a body. It was built for something else entirely, and understanding what that something else was may be the most consequential archaeological question of the 21st century. The King's Chamber sits near the center of the Great Pyramid, accessed by the Grand Gallery, a corbelled passageway 47 meters long and 8.5 meters high, one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements of the ancient world, whose purpose has never been satisfactorily explained. The chamber itself is built entirely from red Aswan granite, not the local limestone that forms the bulk of the pyramid, but granite quarried 800 kilometers away at Aswan and transported to Giza with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to account for. The chamber measures 10.5 meters long, 5.5 meters wide, and nearly 6 meters high. Its walls are smooth. Its floor is level. Its ceiling is composed of 9 granite beams, each weighing between 25 and 40 tons. Above the ceiling, stacked in 5 layers, are the relieving chambers, spaces built to distribute the enormous weight of stone above and prevent the chamber below from being crushed. The uppermost of these chambers has a rough, unfinished granite ceiling that suggests it was the last thing built before the pyramid's capstone was placed. The engineering of the King's Chamber is extraordinary. Its construction required solving structural problems of a complexity that would challenge modern builders. The granite beams of the ceiling have cracked, not recently, but in antiquity, possibly during an earthquake, and yet the chamber has held. The relieving chambers above, invisible and inaccessible for thousands of years, performed their function across 4 millennia without maintenance or inspection. This is not the work of a civilization that was learning to build. This is the work of a civilization that had already mastered something. And at the western end of this masterpiece of ancient engineering, in a chamber built with a care and a precision that the builders reserved for only the most important spaces in their world, sits a rectangular box of dark granite, no lid, no inscription, no contents, empty. The official explanation for the emptiness of the King's Chamber runs like this. The pyramid was built as the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu, who reigned around 2560 BC. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber was intended to hold his mummy. His body was placed there at his death, along with the funerary equipment, the canopic jars, the ushabti figurines, the food offerings, the sacred objects that Egyptian tradition required for the journey into the afterlife. At some point after the pyramid was sealed, tomb robbers entered, removed the mummy and all the valuables, and left behind only the sarcophagus, which was too large and too heavy to be easily taken. This explanation is neat. It is consistent with what we know about tomb robbery in ancient Egypt, which was widespread and began remarkably early, sometimes within decades of a pharaoh's burial. But it has a problem. Several problems, actually. And they are not small. The first problem is the plugs. When the Great Pyramid was first entered in the 9th century AD by a crew working under the orders of the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, they found the ascending passage, the passage that leads from the lower entrance toward the Grand Gallery and ultimately the king's chamber, blocked by enormous granite plugs. These plugs, each weighing several tons, fit the passage so precisely that al-Ma'mun's crew could not remove them. They had to cut around them through the softer limestone of the pyramid's core. The plugs were intact. They had not been moved. They had not been circumvented by any passage that ancient thieves had cut. They were exactly as the pyramid's builders had left them. Which means that any tomb robber who wanted to reach the king's chamber after the pyramid was sealed would have faced exactly the same obstacle that al-Ma'mun's workers faced in the 9th century. An impassable barrier of multi-ton granite blocks, fitted into a narrow passage with no room to work around them. There is no evidence that anyone cut around those plugs before al-Ma'mun. There is no ancient passage, no alternative route, no sign of the kind of destructive forced entry that tomb robbery always leaves behind. The plugs were intact, the passage was sealed, and the king's chamber, when al-Ma'mun's crew finally broke through and entered it, was empty. If no one had been inside since the pyramid was sealed, what happened to the body? The second problem is the inscription. Egyptian royal tombs are covered in text. From the earliest dynasties onward, the interior walls of tombs were inscribed with the name of the buried pharaoh, accounts of his reign, religious texts for the journey to the afterlife, images of his life and his divine status. The Valley of the Kings, where the New Kingdom pharaohs were buried 1,500 years after Khufu, contains chambers whose walls are covered floor to ceiling with hieroglyphs and paintings of extraordinary detail and beauty. Even more modest burials of priests, nobles, administrators contain inscriptions. The presence of text inside a tomb was not a luxury. It was a religious requirement. The inscriptions were the vehicle by which the dead pharaoh could speak to the gods, identify himself in the afterlife, and ensure his eternal existence. The king's chamber of the Great Pyramid contains no inscription, not a single hieroglyph, not the name of Khufu, not a prayer, a spell, a dedication, or a date. Nothing. The walls are bare red granite, polished smooth. The only inscription found anywhere inside the Great Pyramid is the cartouche of Khufu painted on a wall in one of the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, a space that was sealed at construction and had never been entered before the 19th century explorer Howard Weiss blasted through the ceiling to access it. Weiss was later accused of forging that inscription, The accusation has never been definitively resolved. But even if the inscription is genuine, a single cartouche in a hidden chamber that was never meant to be seen is not the funerary decoration of a royal tomb. It is, at most, a construction mark, a note left by workers. It doesn't explain the silence of the king's chamber itself. The third problem is the sarcophagus. The granite box in the king's chamber has been measured, analyzed, and studied extensively. It is carved from a single piece of Aswan granite, with a precision that Egyptologists have found difficult to explain, given the tools that conventional archaeology attributes to the Old Kingdom period. Its interior corners are cut to perfect right angles. Its surfaces are flat to within fractions of a millimeter. The tolerances of its construction are tighter than what would be necessary for a funerary vessel, tighter than what would be visible or meaningful once the lid was in place and the sarcophagus was sealed. Why would the builders of a burial box achieve tolerances of this precision for a container that would be sealed and never seen again? And the lid, which would have been necessary to seal a royal mummy inside, is missing. Not broken, not shattered. Missing. There is no lid in the king's chamber. There is no lid in the pyramid. There is no record of a lid being removed. The sarcophagus was built without one, or the lid was never part of what it was designed to contain. By this point, the accumulation of absences begins to form a shape. No body, no inscriptions, no funerary equipment, intact ceiling plugs that no ancient intruder could have bypassed. A sarcophagus of impossible precision without a lid. The king's chamber does not look like a tomb that was robbed. It looks like a chamber that was built for a purpose other than burial. And that was always, by design, empty of the things that tombs contain. This is the conclusion that a growing number of researchers have arrived at through different paths. Christopher Dunn, a precision engineer who spent years analyzing the king's chamber's dimensions and the sarcophagus's construction tolerances, concluded that the chamber was not a tomb, but a machine. A resonant cavity designed to amplify and harness acoustic or electromagnetic energy. His analysis of the sarcophagus suggested it was built to specifications consistent with a tuned resonator, not a funerary vessel. John Anthony West, working from the same tradition as Robert Schoch, argued that the Great Pyramid predates the Old Kingdom entirely, that it was built by a civilization we have not yet identified, for purposes we have not yet understood, and that the attribution to Khufu was a later addition by a pharaoh who found the monument already standing and claimed it as his own. Graham Hancock has argued that the entire Giza complex was built to encode a specific astronomical date and to serve as a repository, not of a single body, but of knowledge. The king's chamber, on this reading, was not where the pharaoh was placed. It was where something else was placed. Something that may have been removed before the pyramid was sealed. Or something that was never physical in the way a mummy is physical. None of these explanations has been proven, but none of them requires us to believe something that the evidence contradicts. The tomb robbery explanation does. There is one more piece of this puzzle that rarely receives the attention it deserves. The Great Pyramid contains 3 chambers. The subterranean chamber cut into the bedrock far below the pyramid's base. The Queen's chamber at the center of the pyramid's base level, and the King's chamber above it. All 3 are empty. The subterranean chamber was apparently never finished. Its floor is rough, its ceiling uneven, the work abandoned at some point during construction. Conventional archaeology says the builders changed their plans and decided to build the burial chamber higher in the pyramid. The Queen's chamber, which was sealed and hidden behind a limestone plug that wasn't discovered until the 19th century, was found to contain nothing except residue of a chemical compound on its walls. Analysis suggested the compound was gypsum or calcium chloride. Some researchers have speculated it was left by the decomposition of organic material. Others have proposed it was left by a chemical or acoustic process. The chamber was empty. The walls were stained. No one knows why. And the king's chamber, the grandest, the most precisely built, the most carefully engineered of the three, was empty of everything except the lidless granite box. 3 chambers, 3 emptinesses, each empty in a slightly different way. Each empty for reasons that the official explanation, tomb robbery, cannot account for, because the tomb robbery explanation applies only to the king's chamber, and even there, it requires us to ignore the intact ceiling plugs. 3 chambers built with extraordinary care and precision. 3 chambers containing nothing. The absence is too consistent to be coincidence. The emptiness is the message. The question is what it means. This series has followed hidden things: the Ark in Ethiopia, the tunnels beneath Jerusalem, the void inside the pyramid, the chamber beneath the Sphinx. In every case, the mystery was about what was there. The king's chamber inverts the question. The mystery is about what is not there. And in some ways, what is not there is more disturbing than what we have found in every other location we have visited, because the presence of a hidden room, a sealed tunnel, an underground chamber, these suggest concealment. Something was hidden. Someone hid it. The action of hiding implies an object, a reason, a decision. But the king's chamber was not hidden. It was built to be entered. The Grand Gallery leads to it with deliberate architectural grandeur, a 47-meter approach that builds anticipation, that prepares the visitor for what waits at the end. And what waits at the end is nothing. An empty room, a box with no lid, bare granite walls with no name. Whatever the king's chamber was built for, whatever it was designed to receive or to do or to contain, is not there. Either it was removed before the pyramid was sealed, leaving behind a chamber built to specifications that serve no purpose without its contents, or it was never physical, never an object to be placed and later taken, but something that happened in the chamber, something that the chamber was built to make possible, a function, not a storage, a purpose, not a possession. And whatever that purpose was, the builders went to the most extraordinary lengths to create the conditions for it. 80-ton granite beams carried 800 kilometers. Surfaces polished to tolerances of fractions of a millimeter. Relieving chambers stacked above to ensure the space endured. An approach of 47 meters of corbelled stone building, anticipation for the moment of arrival. All of it for an empty room, with a box that has no lid and no name on the walls. The king's chamber is the greatest mystery in the Great Pyramid, not because of what it contains, because of what it doesn't. And because the emptiness, when you look at it carefully enough, begins to look less like an absence and more like an answer to a question we have not yet learned how to ask. There is a specific dimension of the king's chamber that researchers in the field of archaeoacoustics have found consistently remarkable. The chamber resonates, not metaphorically, physically. When sound is produced inside the king's chamber at specific frequencies, the granite walls amplify and sustain it in ways that are measurably different from the acoustic properties of any other space in the pyramid, or indeed from most enclosed stone spaces of similar dimensions. Researchers who have conducted acoustic experiments inside the chamber have found that it resonates most strongly at frequencies between 1 and 200 Hz, the same frequency range as the human voice in deep, sustained chant. The stone sarcophagus, when struck, produces a tone that has been compared to the sound of a bell, a clear, sustained note that carries through the chamber with unusual persistence. This may be coincidence. Stone chambers often have acoustic properties that are not intentional. The king's chamber's dimensions may produce resonance effects that were not designed, but simply emerge from the geometry of a rectangular granite room. But the builders of the king's chamber were not people who left things to chance. The tolerances of the sarcophagus, the precision of the walls, the engineering of the relieving chambers above. Every measurable feature of the king's chamber reflects a level of intentionality that makes coincidental resonance difficult to accept. If the chamber was designed to resonate, if the sarcophagus was designed to produce a specific tone when activated, then the king's chamber was not a passive space waiting to receive a body. It was an active space designed to do something. Something that required red Aswan granite, transported 800 kilometers at enormous cost. Something that required surfaces polished to tolerances that would not be visible once the room was sealed. Something that the builders considered important enough to place at the exact center of the largest structure ever built by human hands, and then sealed and left empty for whoever came next. Consider the timeline. The Great Pyramid has been accessible to outsiders since the 9th century AD, when Al-Mamun's crew broke through. In that time, over 1,200 years, the king's chamber has been entered by Arab explorers, Crusader knights, Ottoman travelers, Napoleonic scientists, Victorian archaeologists, 20th century physicists, and 21st century research teams using technology that the pyramid's builders could not have imagined. Every one of them found the same thing: an empty room, a lidless box, bare walls, 1,200 years of the most sophisticated civilization in the world, with access to the most important monument in the world, and not one of them has been able to explain what the king's chamber was for. Not convincingly, not completely, not in a way that accounts for all the absences simultaneously. The tomb robbery explanation fails because of the plugs. The acoustic machine explanation fails because there is no mechanism that has been identified. The astronomical observatory explanation fails because the chamber has no windows. The initiation chamber explanation, proposed by researchers who connect the pyramid to mystery traditions that used specific spaces for ritual transformation, is untestable by conventional archaeology. Every explanation leaves something unexplained, and the unexplained remainder, in every case, is the same thing: the emptiness itself. At the end of this series, we are left with a collection of sealed doors, a locked chapel in Ethiopia, tunnels beneath the Temple Mount, a void inside the Great Pyramid, a chamber beneath the Sphinx, secret corridors beneath the sands of Egypt. And here, A room that wasn't locked, not hidden, not sealed behind granite plugs, but empty. Always empty. Empty in a way that the conventional explanation cannot account for. Empty in a way that the architecture of the room makes more mysterious, not less. The King's Chamber is the most visited mystery in this series. Millions of people have stood inside it. Millions of people have rested their hands on the lidless granite sarcophagus and felt the silence of a room that should, by every conventional logic, contain the most elaborately preserved body in human history, and felt nothing, and found nothing, and walked back out through the grand gallery, back down the ascendant passage, back into the sunlight of the Giza plateau, carrying the emptiness with them, unable to explain it, unable to forget it. That is what the King's Chamber does to the people who enter it. Not revelation, not discovery, just the persistent, unsettling sense that the room is not empty because something was taken, but because something was here, something that left no trace a tomb robber would want, no inscription a language can read, no physical residue that 4,500 years of archaeology has been able to identify. Something that existed in the King's Chamber, not as an object, but as a condition. And whatever that condition was, whatever the room was built to make possible, it has been here, in this bare granite space, longer than our history remembers, waiting, in the silence, for someone who finally knows how to look, for someone who understands that the emptiness is not the end of the mystery, it is the beginning of it.